It's actually ridiculous how jazzed I am right now. In fact, I'm having to like check the excitement level because my ribs are hurting because I'm so excited. And by the way, it turned out that it's costochondritis. See me for details if you're curious about what's troubling my ribs. But in any case, I am so jazzed, and here's the reason. I've just been doing some research trying to find some articles that might showcase our next conversation in the I Am Rad discussion, that is Introduction and Materials and Methods. And I happened to come up with the most phenomenally supercalifragilisticexpialidocious article. That is, check this: vegetation state and extreme drought as factors determining differentiation and succession of the Caribidae communities in forest damage by a windstorm in the high Tatra Mountains. You got it right here. And you know how some of you wrote about that windstorm, and some of you wrote in your journal about, well, I don't know if this might be linked to anything that we've been discussing in the fevered book. Well, I want you to read this article, and I hope your answer comes back to me as a resounding yes. Okay, so that being said, we are going to turn our attention back to the I am rad formula, because remember last time we were having a discussion of the results section, but this time we are going to turn our conversation to the introductions and the materials and methods sections. I want to begin by talking about the introduction. Now, here's the sweet thing. The reason that we saved this for later is that this is already mostly done. Your proposals, those of you who did a good job on your proposals, have a fantastic introduction section anyway that probably meets a lot of these objectives. Now, in a minute, we're going to talk about things that you might have to change, not necessarily for your final paper, but obviously for your presentation. You can't just show the audience your existing introduction section. You're going to have to showcase that in a little bit different way, and so we're going to have a conversation about that. Let's, though, jump into some of the key features of an introduction section, beginning with the overview of key or pivotal literature. So you want to start your introduction section by telling your reader about those most important journal articles that led you to the area or niche of study that you proposed. Now, this was something that Ben and Sierra did an excellent job of in their research proposal, looking at those few studies that had been done primarily in Norway, Vasalopa included, that led them to propose the not only the methods, but also the type of assessment that they wanted to do on their data for the wax accumulation study. So they'd want to hit on these high points. You don't want to have every piece of literature out there that relates to the topic, because that is quickly going to bore your reader, no matter whether you're talking about a formal literature write-up, or whether you're talking about a poster presentation, or whether you're talking, as we are going to be here, about an oral presentation. You want to just hit on those most pivotal literature sources that really are needed in order to justify the problem at hand. And so that is the second point that we want to hit on here. Again and again and again, it's always important to come back to the significance and the problem statement. That is, what is the problem? Why is this worth studying? So this is significance should be, if you will, the glowing orb around which everything else is built, right? It's like the snitch of the Harry Potter world, of the Harry Potter Quidditch match, right? It is the thing around which everything is run. And so if we can keep on coming back to the significance statement in all cases, that's very important. That is, tell your reader why this all matters. Why should your reader care? And this is also true of your presenter, of those to your audience to which you are presenting in an oral presentation. So the justification, the impetus, why did you do it? Keep coming back to telling your audience, why the research was necessary. Now, for you guys, you didn't, I had a really great conversation with Will and Sindre about hypotheses and specific aims and how they differ from objectives. All of us just stated objectives, and that was 100% fine for the particular proposal that we had at hand. Specific hypotheses actually could have been made for, particularly for Sierra and Ben's research. We didn't state those as specific hypotheses. If that's something we want to go back and do, I can help you with how you might go about doing that. However, objectives is fine. We want to be able to tell our readers in the introduction what led us to those particular objectives. And many of you did a really great job in the last discussion post about remembering those rules of funneling, focusing, and unifying. An introduction is a particularly important place for funneling. That is, you want to begin with this really broad statement of why this matters, and then funnel down to your story in Slovakia, right? The specific site in the High Tatra Mountains where we were sampling snow, or that specific site where we were interviewing people. So you're beginning broad significance and then coming down to your specific study, the objectives that you had, and maybe the specific aims. You're also going to see that they did this in the literature study that we're going to read about the windstorm in the High Tatras. Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and move along to the materials and methods momentarily, but I do just want to make sure that everybody understands how this would differ in your presentation that we're getting ready to do at the Shepherd, and then one that we're going to do later at the Hobbs School. How would your introduction differ? Well, for one thing, right off the bat, it's important to remember that when doing a presentation, all of this has to be condensed. So condensation becomes an important part of presenting in an oral presentation. Condensation and chunking. Chunking is a technical term that actually quite literally means that you want to take like material and put it together in a chunked statement of text, so that you only have a little bit of text that relates to the same thing and that is very accessible to your reader. Perfect. So I think that is enough to get us by to talk then about the materials and methods sections, which once again, the cool thing here is that for many of you, this is actually already done. So looking at the methods section, we want to say a lot. And for certain of the studies that we've done, we have to say more than other of the studies, but we need to be careful in all cases that we're telling about exactly how we derived our data, how we collected them, where we collected them, what was the context, and that's particularly important for us because we need to bring everyone to the region of Slovakia, the High Tatra Mountains, where we were collecting our data. So we need to express how the data were collected, how they were derived and analyzed, and oftentimes using a flowchart for that is a really great idea. I actually have a PowerPoint presentation that uses a flowchart that I'm actually going to bring in for us to take a look at. And this is not a presentation that would be maybe exactly what you all would be doing, because it's actually a flowchart showing how authors are chosen in reporting on climate change literature, but I like the use of a flowchart. So this is what the steps that would have to happen in order to see the publication of a report. And so you see how they use this kind of a flowchart. Well, this could be used by all of you as well, or at least some of you, because you could describe the process that you went through to collect your data. Maybe you could show in flowchart how you wrote your interview questions, and then you went around town and you were able to ask those questions. What was involved in sort of a visual way? Visual is always better. So in the cases that you can use lists and flowcharts, doing that in a visual way is a really cool thing. Visual better. Hey, and you're actually going to see, again, in the High Tatra study that we're going to read, they use some visual representation in, even though this is a journal literature article, not a presentation or a poster, visual is better in many cases. It can say more. And I think several of you actually mentioned that. I think it might have been Sindre who said, you know, the visual, or maybe even Will, who said the visual was easier for him to glean a lot more information from. So the next thing, and this is going to be particularly pertinent for Ben and Sierra, as I look back on it, I realized that we actually were using some novel methods, and particularly as we've been putting together our experimental apparatus in the lab, we've got maybe some illustrations that we may want to make to show what we did there. And this is where a really good lab manual, and I know you guys have been rocking out the really good lab manual, that's where this comes into play, is being able to go back to that and utilize that as your resource for creating those important figures that need to be included in the presentations and in the final write-ups, okay? We all need to describe the site, the population, the context. Methods of sample collection is going to be really important for Ben and Sierra. we're not culturing in this particular case, though that would be really cool, but maybe next time. And the analysis, this time it was a chemical analysis in that case, but in the case of going through interview data, it's how are you analyzing those? So remember how we talked about that. This is really important for all of you who did qualitative studies. When you're analyzing your results, one of the primary things that you need to do is the first thing you would do is to transcribe the interviews. Now, you didn't record the interviews, but you wrote down a lot of information from the interviews. So you're going to need to go through that. And then you're going to need to find themes, and you're going to need to pull out themes, like 60% of the people related this, right? And then you can sometimes put that into both a quantitative and qualitative way, bringing those results by showcasing what the majority of the people said, but also then by giving demonstrative quotes that exemplify the way that those themes emerged in your data. Okay, so these are all things that you want to include. Now I'm going to pull up a different PowerPoint presentation. This was a presentation that's given, it looks to me like a PhD dissertation, and I want to pick on, sorry, that's the wrong one. I want to pick on this particular statement of methods, and so they called it methods and data sets. So they said, okay, 8 kilometer by 8 kilometer and 15-day intervals were derived from NOAA and AVHRR series satellites from 1982 to 2006. Now, the first thing I want to pick on here is that it sounds to me like they might be using a standard method. In many of the bullet points that this person has in their methods section, I think they must be using some sort of standard method. So they would want to cite an author, even if it was just in parentheses the name of that author, so that you could say, hey, this was the standard method that we used, and that would help to exemplify that. Now, this person does go on to use a visual to show the sites, and that's kind of a cool thing. I mean, being able to use the visual to say, here were our sample sites, I think that really works well, and this is something that maybe we could say is done pretty well in this particular presentation. But once again, in the analysis, and this is cool that they did say not only how did they collect the data, but then how did they analyze the data. So this actually gives the analysis, but I think again they may be able to say that they're using a standard method, and they talk about their linear regression in order to determine the statistical analysis. So it seems Ben and Sierra are going to have a little bit of that data analysis on the back end. We're still working on getting there, right? And that's okay. I just want to be thinking about, as we head that direction, how we might want to effectively communicate those findings. Marvelous. So you can assess and I want you to assess the Tatra study as to how well they do with both the introduction and the method. And I'm going to leave our podcast at that, still feeling super jazzed and loving you all. So have a fantastic day.